Let's begin from here in the run. So in the run, we were looking at the run. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again. We did it twice up to the same point. We haven't finished it. But I'll just remind you, the run is asking the question of whether the inuyim, aside from achila and shtiya, are dioraita or durabanan. So he starts off by giving Tosfos's argument that they're dioraisa, and then he pushes back and says he gives these other arguments to say that it's the Rabbanan. All right, I think I got that backwards. Starts off with Tosfos, who holds it's the Rabbanan, and then he brings the arguments to say that it's the Oraisa, and he points out that the Rambam holds that they're the Oraisa. If you say they're the Oraisa, you have to answer, either way, you have to answer certain difficulties in the Gemara. So but we have certain difficulties because there are indications already from the Mishnah that Rechitza and the Ilata Sandal, for example, that Chachamim were already mekil about them, right? Because Melch v'Kala Rochtzim Pneihem, and the Chaya is Noelet Sandal, and so if they were Diraita, how could they be mekil? So the answer that he gives is that there's this idea that they're Diraisa, but they were given over to the Chachamim to define their the extent to which they're chamur or not chamur. This, by the way, gets into a very interesting question, which is a much bigger question that we're not going to get into right now, but this is you can keep this as an example. You might ask yourself, in that Chachamim, we rely on the Chachamim and the Masorot of the Chachamim to understand the Torah, right? So that's a basic assumption. And so you might wonder exactly how do the Chachamim differentiate themselves. In other words, when we look now at dinim that are dioraisa or durabanan, and then we have these kind of this category of things that are actually dioraisa, but that the Rabbanan defined. Essentially, the Rabbanan define all of the dioraisas, right? And at what point did they decide for any given mitzvah or any given halacha that it's dioraisa or derabanan? And also, the idea of something being derabanan implies that there was a decision. In other words, we don't just say it's not something that's arbitrary. We just say, well, if it doesn't fit into the dioraisa, we'll say it's derabanan. So if you say it's derabanan, it implies that there was a Beis Din that sat down and made that decision. And they said, we're going to do such and such or not do such and such in order, as a Geder la Torah or as a Takana of some sort. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing this well, but for any given halacha where it's not clear, and we have halachot where it's a machloket, whether a given halacha is dioraita or derabanan, right? We have several examples of that. So when there's a machloket, what does that imply? What does that mean? Does that mean that what it seems to indicate is that some part of the Masorah gets lost, and so we have to reconstruct it? And what I mean by that is, at some point, maybe we're not sure anymore. If we are not sure, if Chazal are not sure anymore, if something is a din d'oraita or din d'Rabbanan, that means at some point there was a chain of Masorah that became lost, or it became unclear. so that they knew, let's say, such and such is asur, but they don't know if it's asur d'oraita or d'Rabbanan. And what difference does it make? What difference does it make if we say something is d'oraita or something is d'Rabbanan? After all, we learned, and we went over this not long ago in Hanukkah, that that even every d'oraita, every d'Rabbanan is backed by a d'oraita, right? In other words, there's a mitzvah from the Torah to follow dinim d'Rabbanan. Every mitzvah d'Rabbanan, you're chayav d'oraita to follow it. And that we saw that in the machloket. Actually, I think we saw it before, but that I think it's in the sugya in Chanukah. How can we say how do you say a bracha on hadlakat nerot? That you say Asher kitchel mitzvah v'tzivanu. Where does hechan tzivanu? Where did Hashem command us? This is all. The whole thing is the Rabbanan. So the Gemara there says, so we learn it from Lo Tasur, that the Torah says in Parshat Shoftim, Lo Tasur, you're not allowed to deviate from the things that the Chachamim tell you at any given generation. So it means that mid'oraita, you have to follow takanot and gzerot mid'Rabbanan. And then there's a machoket there if you learn that from Lo Tasur or Shala v'yichav yagercha, and we'll have to leave that. It's an important distinction, but in any event, I'm ranting a little bit, but to bring it back to our particular case, so we see there's a machlokas rishonim here about whether or not the inuyim, shar inuyim, are d'oraita or d'Rabbanan. So what difference does it make to us practically to know if they're d'oraita or d'Rabbanan? What difference does it make? They're asur in any event. Nobody disagrees that they're asur. What difference does it make if they're d'oraita or d'Rabbanan?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming that there is more leeway, that there's more potential for finding. Well, first of all, the penalty is less. The penalties, I suppose, are not so relevant anymore.
No, but that's still a relevant point. In other words, the penalty is going to be different if you're over, and we still relate to the penalties that the Torah gives, even though we don't meet out, even though Beit Din doesn't meet out those penalties. So that's one thing. The other thing that you started to say was.
So the second thing is that if we're faced with two values, or actually two mitzvot that seem to be in contradiction to each other, where it's sort of, following one means breaking or skirting the other, then we go with the one that is d'oraita.
Okay, let's change that a little bit. The general rule is going to be that safek d'oraita the chumra, safek d'Rabbanan the kula. Right. So if there's some safek that's associated with the actual carrying out of a mitzvah, so if it's a d'oraita, then you're machmir. If it's d'Rabbanan, then you're mekil. So classic example, let's say, is brachot. Let's say birkot mitzvah. So let's say you don't remember, comes the end of the day, you don't remember if you put on tefillin in the morning. So tefillin is a mitzvah d'oraita. So mishum safek, you're going to put on tefillin. But the brachot are d'Rabbanan. So mishum safek, you don't make a bracha. So that shows the differentiation, right? So you would do the mitzvah, but you wouldn't do the mitzvah of brachot, because the mitzvah of brachot is d'Rabbanan. So safek d'oraita l'chumra, safek d'Rabbanan l'kula.
Shel?
Yeah.
Even for the mitzvot d'oraita, the details have nevertheless been worked out by Chazal, or even later poskim. So it's very strange
Okay, so but
how it works. Yes.
exactly. So that's sort of the point that I'm getting at, that in Hagdarot, right, the Hagdarot of any given mitzvah, the definitions and the parameters of any given mitzvah, we base ourselves on Chazal, right? Chazal tell us what the Hagdarot are. But nonetheless, we will say that whatever their Hagdarot are fall into this category of a mitzvah d'oraita. Maybe at some point, but not now, but maybe at some point if we continue learning long enough, we can learn all this, right? But for anyone who's interested to get a very good overview of the problems, you can learn the Rambam in Hilchot Mamrim. Just go through the first few chapters of Hilchot Mamrim, and he lays out his vision of the way this works. Okay, so back to the Ran. So the Ran says, get my place. Right. So this is how he ended up in his ta'anot to say that that the Inuyim are d'oraita, right? Tosfos holds the Inuyim are d'Rabbanan, and then the Ran pushes back, and this is what he says in the conclusion of his pushback. So it seems to me that all of them are d'oraita. But these are not, these inuyim are not explicitly written in the Torah. We learn them out from the ribui, right, from the extra psukim of Shabbaton, etc. In other words, the 5 psukim that started off this part of the sugya. Uchadita b'Gemara, as we see in the Gemara, kilei tfei. So because they're not written explicitly in the Torah, they are more kal. Right, we consider them to be like Misaran Hakatuv l'Chachamim. The Torah gave them over to the Chachamim, meaning the Torah gives them to the Chachamim to decide their Hagdarot, to decide their definitions and their parameters. V'hen hikilu behen k'fi ma shira'u. So they were makil according to the way they saw. Right, according to their judgment. And this is the Ran's understanding, and his Ran's understanding is that Chachamim were matir any of these things, any of the other inuyim that were not done for pleasure. Okay, so that the idea not done for pleasure, so that doesn't apply to eating, because eating is now in its own category. Because even though you can also say the Torah says v'yinitem et nafshotechem, it doesn't say explicitly not to eat, but we learn out that the initem in the Torah, stam v'initem, we can associate that with not eating because of the pasuk of Vayadcha v'yarivecha. So that's as if it's written explicitly in the Torah. That's the implication of the Ran. But the other times that the Torah says v'initem and ta'anu, those are all ribuyim. They're coming to add other inuyim that are not explicit in the Torah. So since they're not explicit in the Torah, they are dioraita, but they're given to the chachamim to determine how to apply them, and their determination was that these inuyim apply if you're doing them for pleasure. But if you're not doing them for pleasure, then they're permitted. So, for example, if your hands are dirty, you can wash the dirt off of your hands. And there are exceptions also for, let's say, walking with shoes. If you have to walk in a place where you might get harmed from walking, right? If you're, then you're allowed to wear shoes, and we see that the chaya is allowed to wear shoes. Like there's certain things that will make you. The Chain Dat HaRambam Zal, the Perek Rishon Me'Hilchot Shvitat Asor, the Kluhu Midiraita Minan. I think we looked at the Rambam last week, and if we didn't, I apologize. I don't remember now. I didn't go over this year. But you can look there in the beginning of Hilchot Shvitat Asor, and he says all of the Inuyim Midiraita Eladulo. So now we have the sort of the final swing of the Ran, right? So he brought Tosfos, who holds they're all D'Rabbanan, and then he brings arguments to say that they're all D'Oraita, and this he ends up by saying essentially this is the opinion of the Rambam. But he has problems with that also. Right, so this doesn't work. Michvara, if you know, like chiver. Sorry, I don't talk that much during the week, so I thought I was over this coughing bit, but I see now when I talk, I'm still coughing. Okay. Chiver means white, essentially, right? Chiver, it means white. It's an Aramaic term, and michvara means it means like in colloquial English, we'd say this doesn't wash with me. In other words, this doesn't work out, is what he's saying. That which you learn later on, and we didn't do this Gemara yet. We'll still do it, but for the purposes of finishing the Ran, let's just see what he says. Hatinokot mutarin bekulan chutz me'nilata sandal. Right. So the Gemara later on says that all of the tinokot, right? That in other words, children, minors, people who are not yet bar bat mitzvah, they are permitted to do all of the inuyim except for wearing shoes. Muchach b'Gemara demutarin bekulan deka'amar hainu demutar ligdolim lerochtzan uvusochan. We understand from the sugya there what that means. What does it mean that children are permitted in all of these things? It means that adults are allowed to wash them or to anoint them. And as we'll explain, and here, and since the Gemara says it's stam, that adults are allowed to wash children, for example. So what can you say? That stam, that means they're doing it for pleasure. And you can't say that they're washing them mishum sakana, right? That if they don't wash their kids, that endangers their life. Because we know if you don't wash for a day, they're not going to be put in danger. And if the isur of washing, for example, is dioraita, hechishari, how can it be permitted for an adult to wash their child? The haktiv lo tochlum, the karibe lo ta'achilum, ahazir gdolim al ktanim. Here it's written, you shall not feed them, and we read, and the way we read that, in which the drasha is lo ta'achilum, you don't feed them, and this is to warn adults about children. We're going to digress on this. I'll show you the sugya that the Ran is referring to here. One moment. I decided that it's worth taking a look at the sugya so you understand, and also, even though you don't have children or your children may be grown up or whatever, this is still an important thing to understand. So the Gemara here in Yevamot, there's a bit of a digression here in the sugya, and we have the following story. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisa, we're in Yevamot Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Bet, at the bottom of the Amud. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna Yechesule Maftechei Debei Midrasha Rishuta Rabim B'Shabta. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna, the keys to the Beit Midrash were lost somewhere in the Rishuta Rabim, somewhere in the public, right? In the public, and on Shabbos. The Bach removes the word Shabbos, but you'll see it in a sense you'll understand the sugya either way. In other words, he lost his keys somewhere, right? Somewhere out in the open, somewhere out in public. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna ata l'kamei de Rabbi Padat. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna comes to Rabbi Padat and Amar le, and he says to him, Zil Devar Tali Vitalia V'Litailu Hatim. He says, go take a boy and a girl, or a boy or a girl, and go walk there. In other words, he had an idea, probably like he was walking from his house and he gets to the base of Medrash, and somewhere between his house and the base of Medrash, his keys dropped and he lost them. And now apparently it is Shabbos. So the problem is, even if he finds them, what can he do? It's not like now where, there's an Eruv everywhere. There wasn't an Eruv. The Rishus Rabim is the Rishus Rabim. You're not allowed to carry the keys. So even if he goes and finds the keys, there's nothing he can do. So he tells Rabbi Padat, go take a boy and a girl, or take a kid, and go and walk there. Because then if they find them, then they'll bring them. In other words, so what's he saying? What's his plan?
Have the kids do it. They're not. There's no Easter for them to carry on Shabbat.
So the assumption is there's no Easter for the kids to carry on Shabbos, on the one hand. On the other hand, what doesn't he say? What doesn't he say to tell the kids?
He tells them not to tell the kids to look for them explicitly.
Right. In other words, he just says, take kids and go and walk. And then if the kids find them, they'll understand, and then they'll bring the keys. So it's relying on, so it's exactly what Michael said. On the one hand, there's no Easter for the kids to carry on Shabbos, even in a Rishus Rabim, and even from Rishus Rabim to Rishus Yachid. There's no Easter for them. But the implication is, we can't tell the kids to do something. We can put them in a situation where they might do something that to our benefit, but we can't tell them explicitly to do it. So Alma Kasavar, right? So now the Gemara is commenting on Rabbi Yitzchak's instructions to Rabbi Padat. And we see Alma Kasavar, so teaches us that he holds Katan Ochel Nevelot, Ain't Beitin Mitzuvin Lahafrisho. In other words, we will derive from this story Rabbi Yitzchak holds that a child, a minor, who's eating nevelot, in other words, he's eating non-kosher food, Beit Din is not commanded to separate him from it, to remove him from that. In other words, if they see a minor eating treif, in other words, even based in, like nobody has to tell them to stop eating. How do we learn that out from the story? How do we learn that out from the story?
In the first case, if the kids find the keys, you don't have to say to them, oh no, you shouldn't pick it up, which is the equivalent of eating, you don't say to the kids, stop eating the tray food.
Right, exactly. We see from the way Rabbi Yitzchak gives instructions to Rabbi Tat that he must hold that if you see a minor being over on some mitzvah d'oraita, you don't have to stop them. That's at very minimum, right? Because actually, Rabbi Yitzchak is kind of depending on the kids to be over the d'oraita, right? He essentially wants them to do that. But you can, so on the one hand, you can't tell them to be over, and on the other hand, if they're over, you don't have to say anything to them. You don't have to stop them. So now the Gemara says, Lema Messiah. So let's say this Breita here is going to support this notion that a katan ochel nevelot ein beidin mitzuvim lahafrisho. So the Breita says, Lo yomar adam atinok haveli mafteach haveli chotem ela minicho tolesh minicho zorek. Somebody should not say to a minor, bring me a key or bring me a seal, meaning bring me a key or bring me a seal on Shabbos. So you can't tell a child explicitly to carry something for you on Shabbos. Either carry or the chotem could also be an union of muktzah. You're not allowed to tell them to explicitly to do that. But on the other hand, minicho tolesh, minicho zorek. But if they see a child who's picking at vegetation on Shabbos, like pulling up vegetation or tearing off a leaf or something like that, you can let him do it. You don't have to stop them from doing it. Minicho zorek. If you see them throwing something in the Reshuta Rabim, or from Reshuta Rabim to Reshuta Yachid, you can also let them throw. Those things are asur for those are isurim d'oraita. So it means on the one hand, you can't tell a child explicitly to be over on an isur d'oraita on Shabbos, but if they are being over me'atzmam, right, of their own volition, then you can let them do that. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says this is not a proof. So the Breita seems to fit exactly into what we're saying, right? It seems to fit exactly. That Rabbi Yitzchak understands, this would be a support for Rabbi Yitzchak, who understands he can't tell the children to bring his keys, but on the other hand, if they find the keys, I don't have to stop them from bringing them. So Abaye pushes back. Amar Abaye tolesh batzitz sheino nakud. So Reik, the Karmelit, the Rabbanan. Abaye says there's not a proof from here. Because this Breita is talking about what? When it says, like, you could let a child be tolesh, you could let them pick vegetation, that's talking about picking vegetation from an atzitz sheino nakuv. What's an atzitz sheino nakuv? What's an atzitz? Right?
a pot for growing things.
right? It's like a plant pot, right? So Natzitz is a plant pot. And Chazal talked about two kinds of plant pots. There's a Natzitz shenakuv, Natzitz sheino nakuv. What does it mean? That you have a plant pot, either it has a hole in the bottom, or it's sealed at the bottom. What's the difference? What's the difference halachically? What's the practical difference?
The hole at the bottom is considered to be connected to the ground.
So, for halachic purposes, an atzitz sheino nakuv is completely separated from the ground. If it's a atzitz nakuv, even if it's not physically touching the ground, it can also be considered as if it's touching the ground. So for a myriad halachot in Zra'im, right? For all kinds of, and I see you're nodding your head, right? So you learn through Zra'im for lots of halachot regarding mitzvot hatuliyot ba'aretz. There's a big difference between atzitz shenakuv and atzitz sheino nakuv, right? Gam legabe shmita, legam shumot u'masrot, for virtually everything, and also on Shabbos there's a difference, right? Because tolesh, to pick at vegetation, that's an isur d'oraita when the vegetation is connected to the ground, but if it's not connected to the ground, it's d'Rabbanan. And Zorek, so Abai is saying that the Braita is talking about a case of atzitz sheino nakuv. When is it that you let a child pick at let's say, tear off a leaf of a plant? That's when the plant is in a plant pot that's not at all connected to the ground. It doesn't have any hole at the bottom. That's when it's permitted. And Zorek, when do you let them throw something on Shabbos? When they're in a Carmelit, right? So, what's a Carmelit?
If I understand correctly, it's kind of like some space between Yachid and Rabin, and it's a rabbinic construction.
Right. Right, so there are four Rishuyot b'Shabbat. There's a Rishut Rabim, Rishut Yachid, Carmelit, and Makom Patur. So the Carmelit, Chazal said, it's essentially a Carmelit. Essentially, the Carmelit has the same characteristics of a Rishut Rabim, except the Rabim don't actually go there. That's the main difference. We won't get into all the details now, but they're different. But for our purposes, it's enough to know that a Carmelit midioraita, you would be allowed to carry in a Carmelit. You'd be allowed to walk Dalet Amot holding on to something in a Carmelit, but not in a Rishut Rabim, right? And the same thing for Zorek. You would be allowed midioraita to throw something more than 4 amot in a Carmelit, but not in Rishut Rabim. So Abaye is saying, you want to bring a proof from this Braita that says one, right, lo yomar adam l'tino kavela mitech avela chotem ela minicho tolesh minicho zorek. You want to bring a proof from here that if you see a child being over on a d'oraita, you let them do it. But I'll tell you no, because the Braita is talking about isurim d'Rabbanan. We're talking about being tolesh from an atzitz nakuv, and they're talking about being zorek and a karmelit. So that's not a proof. This does not support Rabbi Yitzchak's contention. And Rabbi Yitzchak's contention does seem to be, though, that he's relying apparently on an idea that if you see a child being over on an isur d'oraita, that you don't have to stop them, right? But right now we don't have a proof. So Tashema. So let's see if we can bring a proof from here. Oved, we have another brayta. Oved kochavim sheba lechabot. Ein omrim lo kabeh va'al tichbeh. So a non-Jew on Shabbos who's going to put out a flame, right? Maybe he's turning off, he's putting out a light or he's putting out a fire. We don't say to him, put it out, or we also don't say to him, don't put it out. Because there's the shvita of the Jew is not the responsibility of the goy. Meaning what?
They can do as they please.
They can do as they please, and they don't have they're not obliged to keep your Shabbos for you. Ein shvitato, the shvita of the Jew is not alehem, is not their responsibility. So that's the case of a goy. So if a goy comes to turn out a light on Shabbos, for example, you don't have to say anything to them. Sorry, you don't say anything. Eino mrimla, right? That's the pashtus of the brisa. You don't say to them, "Don't turn it out." Or if you want it to be on, you don't say, "Don't turn it out," because they have no chiyuv. That goyim don't have a chiyuv of shvita at all, and they have no chiyuv vis-a-vis your chiyuv. Right, they're not responsible to you for you to keep your Shabbos for you. Katan habalichbot. But what about a Jewish kid? What about a minor who's about to put out a fire on Shabbos, some kind of a flame on Shabbos? Omrim lo al tichbeh, sheshvitato alehem. The kid who's coming to put out the fire, we do say to him, don't put it out, because you are responsible for the kid's shvita. So, what is this bright to tell me? What would we conclude from this bright? Does this support Rav Yitzchak or not? Rav Yitzchak being the one who wanted the kids to go and find the keys.
It's a rejection because you should say to them, don't pick up the keys.
Right. If you see, so based on this, we shouldn't hold like Rav Yitzchak that if you actually see the kids picking up the keys and start to walk with them, you should say leave them, because you're responsible for them to keep Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Excuse me. Al das aviv. So Rabbi Yochanan says this is talking about a case where he's doing according to the father's will. And Rashi explains, Shatinok tzofe ba'aviv, u'roeh noach lo bekach. It's a case where the kid is about to put out the flame, and he looks at his father, and he sees that from the father that it's okay with the father. Yaviv made a love, and his father is standing right there. In such an instance, it's as if the father is telling him to do it. But in the case of Rav Yitzchak and his lost keys, he doesn't tell the kids that he lost the keys, and they won't be able to see him to know if that's something that he wants or doesn't want. So what's this idea, Bosel dat aviv? In other words, that when the Braita says, that the Katan is coming to turn out the light, Rabbi Yochanan says, what does it mean? It's talking about a case where the kid is about to turn out the light with his father standing right there. And even though the father doesn't tell him to do anything with words, he's indicating by his presence and the fact that he doesn't stop him that it must be okay. And in such a circumstance, that's tantamount to the father telling him to do it. But if you give no indication to the child, like in the case of Rabbi Yitzchak, then it's okay. So this Braita seems to go against Rabbi Yitzchak, but Rabbi Yochanan says, no, but I could learn it the other way. I could learn it so that it doesn't contradict Rabbi Yitzchak, and it's a de facto support. So now, though, we have to remember that this Braita is talking both about a minor, but also about a goy. So what was the din with the goy? The goy that comes to turn out a light, you don't say anything to him. So now what are we going to say? If we want to say that the Braita is consistent, it would also be with the Jew standing nearby. Right? It would also be with the Jew standing nearby, where the Oved Kochavim sees the Jew knows that the goy is about to turn out the light, and he sees that it's Noach, right? It seems that this is something that the Jew is okay with. So how does that work, right? The Kavate Gabe Oved Kochavim Dosel Dat Yisrael Mishar, would that be permitted? Is that permitted? That a Jew could stand there and give tantamount permission to the goy to turn out the light? So the Gemara says, "Obed kochavim adata denafshei aviv." The goy is not the same as the child. The goy adata denafshei, right? He's going after his own. He's doing according to his own mind. He's not doing it because there's a Jew standing nearby. He's doing it because he wants to do it. So we're starting to differentiate now, right, between the way we relate to a non-Jew on Shabbos and the way we relate to a child on Shabbos. Tashma, right? So now we have another Braita. Ben chaver sheragil leilech etzel avi imo am haaretz. So a chaver, okay. So what's a chaver? Michael Schwartz, I think you must have come across this if you learned Zerayim. What's a chaver?
It's someone, I don't know if you want to, I said Talmud Chacham that's very particular about issues of purity, particularly concerning fruits and vegetables.
Yafeh. Right. So the idea of the chaver, which is an idea that we have some remnants of nowadays, but not so much as we used to. But in the time of the Mishnah, and even in the time after the Mishnah, a chaver was somebody, lav dafka talmid chacham, but somebody. Nowadays we just say they're from. There were different levels of chaver, right? There were different levels of hakbara, but like you say, right, at the time, not just of the Beit HaMikdash, but even for generations after the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there were people who were very makbid about different levels of maintaining tahara, for example. And also, like you say, a chaver would be somebody that we would trust to take trumot and ma'asrot, to be and to follow all the mitzvot hatuyot ba'aretz. So here we have it. Here we have a case that it rings familiar to many people today in some sense. It's not exactly the same, but what if, in other words, so what if you're religious and you want your kids to visit your grandparents, and your grandparents aren't religious? So do you have to worry about what your grandparents are going to feed your kids? That's basically what's going on. Ben Chaver, right? So the child, the son of a Chaver, Sheragil lelech etzel avi imo am haaretz, who was accustomed to go visiting his mother's father, right? His grandfather from his mother's side. I don't think it's entirely relevant whether it's avi imo or aviv, but bonagid. He's going to visit his grandfather, who's an Am Haaretz. Am Haaretz here means somebody who's not a Chaver. So it's somebody that we don't know. It's not that we know that they don't keep these laws of mitzvot hatzliyot ba'aretz. We don't. It's not that we know that they don't, but we don't know. That is, we don't trust them to keep them consistently. Nonetheless, we don't worry that he might feed something to his grandchild that's not mitukan. In other words, that he would give him food that's not hufrash trumotu masrot. Right? That's the tikkun for fruits and vegetables is you take trumotu masrot. So we're not worried that he's going to feed him something that's not mitukan. That is, we're not worried that he'll feed him something not kosher. Matzah biyado perot ein zakuk lo. And if you find fruit in his hands, you don't have to do anything about it. And you don't have to stop him from eating them. You don't have to. Rashi says we told him that you don't have to remove them from it. In other words, so if you find that your child has fruits that were given to him by his grandfather, who's an Am Haaretz, you don't have to remove them from his hands. So what does this prove? What does this tell me? We're still dealing with this question of Rav Yitzchak, who lost his keys. And he said, get the kids to walk around and, maybe they'll find them and bring them on Shabbos. What does this have to do with that?
So it proves that you can put your child in a situation where he may end up doing something that is contrary to halacha.
And not only that, but what? That if you see,
and then if you see him doing something that is contrary to halacha, you don't have to stop him.
That's so basically, yes. If you see him doing something that may be contrary to halacha, you don't have to stop him, because matzah biyado perot, if you find him holding the perot, you don't have to take them away from him. You don't have to stop him from eating them. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and if that's the case, then this would support Rabbi Yitzchak, right? So this would be a support for Rabbi Yitzchak, who says, let the kids go out, and if they find the keys, we don't have, it's fine. We don't have to encourage them to do it, and we don't have to stop them from doing it. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'dmai hekilu. So Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, but here what's our chashash? Our chashash is ultimately a chashash of demai. What's demai?
There's a doubt.
Michael Werner, go ahead.
Demai is produce whose status is uncertain. It's
Uh,
uncertain. It's uncertain. It's uncertain whether it's been misered, whether maser and teremot have been taken or not.
Right, whether Meiser has been taken. So what's the, so Rabbi Yochanan says that, so in this Braita, this is for practical purposes, this is what differentiates the Chaver from the Am Haaretz. The Am Haaretz, we don't know if they took Maser. But the Chaver, we know that he did, right? So if you see Peirot biyad ben Chaver, right? If the father sees his son bringing Peirot from his grandfather, who's an Am Haaretz, he doesn't have to take them away. That would seem to indicate that I don't have to prevent him from eating something that would be asur to eat midioraita. Rabbi Yochanan says lav dafka, because it could be that since it's an Am Haaretz, it means it's a safek. It's not that we know that they didn't take maser, it's just we're not sure if they took maser, right? And if you remember when you learned about Demai, the truth is most Am Haaretz did take maser, but because there was a significant minority that didn't, Chachamim were machmir about Demai, about Peirot from an Am Haaretz. So Rabbi Yochanan says, "B'demai hekilu." This is regarding Demai, and by Demai they were mekil. In other words, here it's not a suffix d'oraita; it's a suffix d'Rabbanan. Whether or not this, if the kid eats this, if they're over on some kind of an isur. So once again, I don't have a proof. I don't have a proof that would support Rabbi Yitzchak. Elatama de Demai havadai ba'alesuri, right? Okay, so Gemara now says, wait a second. Elatama de Demai. So you're saying the reason I don't have to take the Peirot away from the kid is because you're saying that the Peirot are Demai. So what does that tell me? Havadai, if they were for sure not mufrash trumot masrot, or truma they weren't choshesh, but maser they were choshesh. If it's for sure that if you knew for sure that they didn't have maser taken, ba'alasure, then the implication is you would have to take them from the child and take maser from them before you would let him eat them. In other words, this is what I understand based on Rabbi Yochanan's answer, right? Rabbi Yochanan is saying the reason in the Braita that the kid, you don't have to take the Peirot away from the kid who came from his grandfather, who's an Am Haaretz, is because it's Demai, and by Demai I'm Mekil. So that implies if I knew that they weren't Demai, if I knew that they were Vadai without, that they hadn't been Meisered, then he would have to take them away and he would have to Meiser. V'hama Rabbi Yochanan, boseh al dat aviv. And didn't Rabbi Yochanan say that we're talking about a case, in other words, in the previous Braita, he explained the previous Braita by saying that the kid was doing this in the father's presence and with the father's tacit approval. Meaning what? Rashi says, Rabbi Yochanan la'el bosel dat aviv, aval ha'frisho eino mitzuveh, hecha detinok avida data denafshe. Rabbi Yochanan earlier, when it's talking about the kid who's going to put out the light or he's going to throw something. So Rabbi Yochanan explained there that why don't wait a second. That if the minor is about to put out a light on Shabbos or he's about to throw something on Shabbos, that actually the Braita says you have to tell them to stop. And Rabbi Yochanan explained it. Why do you have to tell them to stop? Because osel dat aviv. The Braita there is talking about a case where the father is present and the father is giving tacit approval. What if the father wasn't there and the father wasn't giving tacit approval? What would be the din?
Then there'd be no obligation to stop the child.
Then there'd be no obligation to stop the child. Okay, so hold that in your head. And now we have the case of the kid who's coming with Peirot from his grandfather. And we're concluding that if for sure they were not meisered, you'd have to meiser them. That's the implication based on Rabbi Yochanan's understanding. So why would you have to meiser them? After all, Rabbi Yochanan already said the only reason that you have to stop a kid from being Mechal Shabbos is if the kid is being Mechal Shabbos with the tacit approval of the father. So that would tell me the only time I have to keep a kid from being over on a Dioraisa is if the kid thinks that it's something that the father wants or the father approves of. But if the father is not really involved, then it doesn't matter. The kid should be able to do what he wants. We don't have to stop him. So it seems like Rabbi Yochanan is contradicting himself. Does that make sense? Can you say it back?
So as I understand it,
Okay.
So as I understand it, one can put the kid in harm's way, as it were. And indeed, if one puts the kid in harm's way, and the kid, actually violates the mitzvah, then one is not obligated to stop the kid. However, if the kid thinks that his father actually wants him, that his father says that's okay for him to break the mitzvah, then one is obligated to stop the kid. So I'm not sure if I see the contradiction, because in the case of, say,
Okay, so let's step back. Let's do this again because I want to keep it as clear as possible. So in the first case, we have a Braita. I shouldn't say the first case, I should say the previous case, because we have a number of cases here. But just a second. In the previous Braisa, we said we had two cases. We had the case of the Oved Kochavim and the case of the child. So Oved Kochavim Shabal Lichbot Ein Omrim Lo Kabeh the Altichbeh. So a goy on Shabbos is going to put out a light on Shabbos. We don't tell him put out the light. We won't tell him not to put out the light. They're not responsible for your Shabbos. Or you're not responsible for their Shabbos. So Rabbi Yochanan, but a katan in the same position, who's coming to put out a light, we tell him don't put out the light. So based on the simple understanding of that, what did we say? It sounds like if you see a child, a minor, who's about to be over on a mitzvah d'oraita, you have to stop them. And if that's true, then we would have a question on Rav Yitzhak, who said, let the kids go out and pick up the keys, and meaning that presumably if they pick up the keys, you wouldn't stop them, and they would come and they could open the Beit HaMedrash on Shabbos. So that seems to go against it. So Rabbi Yochanan says no, but the Brisa here, when it's talking about the kid, why do we have to stop the kid who's about to put the light out on Shabbos? Because he's doing it with the tacit approval of his father. So what does that imply? If the father wasn't there, or if the child had no reason to believe that the father was giving tacit approval, I wouldn't have to stop him. And so that supports Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, so that's the first case in our sub cases here. So then I have the case of the Ben Chaver Sheragil Leilech Eitz Avi Mo Am Haaretz. So I have this kid who's the son of a Chaver, and the Chaver, of course, only eats food that's been meisered. And now, he lets his son go to visit his grandfather. The grandfather, we assume, is not going to do maaser, or we don't know if he's going to do maaser or not. So the stam din is we're not really worried that he's going to give him things that are not meiser. And matzah biyado perot, if you find produce in the kid's hand, ein zakukla, you don't have to stop him from eating it. So what does that imply? What does that imply about preventing children or not preventing children from being over on Dioraita?
It's saying that you don't have to stop the children from being over.
Okay, you don't have to stop them. So a moment ago, in the previous case about the kid who's about to put the light out on Shabbos, what was our conclusion there? Do you have to stop him or not?
You have to stop them if the father is there.
You have to stop them if the father is there. If the kid thinks that the father's approving, then you have to stop him. But on his own, right? Or if we have no reason to believe that the kid thinks that there's some kind of tacit approval, I don't have to stop him. I don't have to stop him. So when I read this Braita, when I get to this part, Matzah biyado perot ein zakuklo, that would seem to fit in. That would seem to be the same thing, right? That if he's holding the perot, I don't have to remove them from his hand. That would be like if I see the kid about to put the light out on Shabbos, as long as I don't think he's doing it with his father's approval or at his father's silent urging, I don't have to stop him. The reason I think that about the first case is because that's how Rabbi Yochanan understood the first case. Right? Without Rabbi Yochanan, I would have thought that when the pastures of the first brisa is that katana balichbot omrim lo al tichbeh. The plain case is I do stop him. So in the first case, in the case of katana balichbot, if he's about to put it out, I'm supposed to stop him. And then Rabbi Yochanan refines that. He explains that I only have to stop him when he thinks he has approval. But if he doesn't think he has approval, then I don't have to stop him. So then when I come to the second Braita, Matzah biyado perot ein zakuklo, at that moment I should say Rabbi Yochanan should agree with this Braita as is. It fits in exactly to the way Rabbi Yochanan understood the previous Braita. That if there's no one there, and the kid is about to be over on a mitzvah d'oraita, I don't stop him. But what happens? Rabbi Yochanan says, "B'demai hekilu." Rabbi Yochanan explains this second braita by saying, no, matzah biyado peiro. Why is it that you don't have to stop him from eating them? Because it's demai, and by demai we're mekil. It's only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and by this, in particular, by demai, chachamim were mekil to let children eat demai. So what is that? So in other words, if Rabbi Yochanan hadn't said anything, then I would say this braita goes just like the way Rabbi Yochanan understood the previous braita. But now Rabbi Yochanan is saying something, and he's modifying the way I understand this second braita. So by saying b'demai hekilu, then what does that imply? That if you find peirot that are not mitukanim, in other words, you find peirot that are for sure not meisered in the hands of the child, then what would you do?
You would stop him from eating.
You would stop him from eating. Because the only reason I didn't stop him from eating is because I thought that I'm holding its demai. But because Rabbi Yochanan says that, it implies that Rabbi Yochanan himself holds that if the child is holding peirot that are not musarim, then they're asur d'oraita, and you would have to stop him from eating it. So now Rabbi Yochanan is contradicting himself, because the way he explained the first braita, I understand the conclusion would be that if I see a child who's about to be over on a d'oraita, I don't have to stop him. The only time I have to stop him is if I think he's doing it because the father wants him to do it. But if he's on his own, I don't stop him. And now my conclusion is, if I see that the kid is holding peirot that are asur to eat midioraita, I would have to stop him. So that's the contradiction. That's how it doesn't work, right? So that's what the Gemara says, Elataima de demai. So the reason, according, there was the understanding, or the perush here of Rabbi Yochanan is that the reason I don't stop the kid from eating the peirot is because they're demai. Ha vadai, but if they were vadai chayav to be meisered, then ba'al asure, then he would have to take meiser from them in order to allow the kid to eat them. Meaning, otherwise, you would stop the kid from eating them. V'hama Rabbi Yochanan vosel dat aviv. And Rabbi Yochanan said, no, the only time you have to stop him is when he's osel dat aviv. And here he's not doing osel dat aviv, and still I have to stop him. Ela Rabbi Yochanan suke misafkele. The truth is, Rabbi Yochanan himself wasn't sure about the din. He wasn't sure how to pass it. Kaihacha madri. Kaihacha madri. When he's standing here, he's docha. In other words, when he's standing in the first braita, and the Pashtus says, that I stop him, then he's docha and says, left after you have to stop him. You only have to stop him under certain circumstances. Kaihacha by the peirot, and it sounds like that I don't have to stop him. It's also madri, he's doche, right? He pushes that the pashtus of the braita away to say, no, sometimes you do have to stop him. Sometimes you do, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So in other words, Rabbi Yochanan, the conclusion here is it's true. Rabbi Yochanan contradicts himself. He's playing both sides of the game. And it's because he himself wasn't sure. So now we say Tashema. Bring another example. Ben Chaver Kohen Shiragil Elech Eitzel Avi Mo Kohen Am Haaretz. And I'm going to bring another example. What if you have the son of a chaver who's a kohen, and he's accustomed to visit his grandfather, who's a kohen, but the grandfather is a kohen am haaretz. Ein chosheshim shemi yachilenu truma tameya. We're not worried that he's going to feed his grandson truma that's tamei. And similarly, matzah b'yado perot ein sakupta. And if you find like the kid has, excuse me, the kid has perot in his hands, you don't have to remove them. So this would seem to indicate what?
It's the same situation where it supports Rabbi Yitzhak that you can let the child be over the right.
You should let the child be over on this dioraita. So there also I can give an answer and say truma d'Rabbanan. Maybe the Braita here is only talking about truma d'Rabbanan, and just like a mekel by demai, I could be mekel by truma d'Rabbanan to let him eat it. So it doesn't prove to me that I don't stop a child who's about to be over on d'oraita. So now we have another example. Tashma yonek tinok ve'olech me'ovedet kochavim mi'behemat tameya. Ve'en chosheshin bionek sheketz v'lo yachilenu neverot u'trefot shkatzim u'remasim u'mikulan yonek mehem ve'afilu b'shabbat u'begadol asur. Okay, so this is a interesting set of cases that a child can suckle and go, right? Yonek v'holech me'ovedet kochavim. He can continue to suckle from a non-Jewish wet nurse. Umi behemat tameya. He could suckle from a non-kosher animal. Ve'en chosheshin bionek sheketz. And we're not worried that he'll be yonek from a sheketz, from a kind of, right, from another kind of vermin that the Torah forbids. But you shouldn't feed him these things that are asur d'oraita. You shouldn't feed him with your hands. Neveirot, trefot, shkatzim, uremasim. Yonek mehem, but he could suckle from them even on Shabbat. Ubegadol asur, but if an adult, of course, is not allowed to. Right, Rashi says, "Ein chosheshin l'marshu yonek sheketz." We're not worried that he's suckling from a sheketz, klamar davar hamishukatz v'ne'asar. Right, that we're not worried that he's suckling from something that is actually forbidden for him to suckle from. But nonetheless, lo yachilanu biyadayim dvarim ha'asurim. You can't feed explicitly a child food that's not kosher. The fat of a non-kosher animal is asur for an adult because we learn it out gamal beit pamim beperakam v'torah. Okay, so you can't explicitly feed the child something that you know to be asur d'oraita. Abba Shaul omer noagin hayinu shiyonkim mibehemat tahora biyom tov. Abba Shaul says we were accustomed to let the child suckle from a kosher animal on Yom Tov. That's the bright. Tani Miha, it says nonetheless in the Baita, Ein chosheshin v'yoneg sheketz. It says that we're not choshesh that he's going to be yoneg, something that is shakut, something that's from a treif animal.
So sheketz does not simply mean vermin, it means treif animal.
Yeah, that's how Rashi understands it. Which makes more sense for other reasons. But what do we see? Ein chosheshin b'yoneg sheketz. So it indicates it's another case where it sounds like that if a child is going to be over on a dioraita by eating something that's treif, I don't have to worry about that. So the Gemara answers, Hata mishum sakana. So the Gemara says no, but there in the Braita, it's talking about a case of sakana, where we're afraid that if the child doesn't suckle, that their life is going to be in danger. Ihachi gadol nami. So if it's a case of sakana, so why does the Braita say that it's forbidden for an adult? Right? So an adult we could have a case where an adult's life is in danger, and maybe the prescription is that they have to suckle, and the only animal they can suckle from is a non-kosher animal. So how can you say that it's talking about a case of sakana? If it's a case of sakana for the child, then it should be, and that's why it's mutar, or that's why ein chosheshin, then it should also be that ein chosheshin for the gadol. So the Gemara answers, gadol bai umdana. The adult needs to be evaluated. One of the reasons I want to come up to this point is because we're going to talk later about this idea of umdana regarding Yom Kippur. Now here it's not talking about Yom Kippur, but it's talking about generally a case of sakana. So it wants to say that when a child suckles either directly or indirectly, that in other words, it's drinking the milk of an animal that's not kosher, the Bright is talking about a case where we're giving the child that milk because of sakana. But if it wasn't a case of sakana, I wouldn't let the child have that milk because it's asur d'oraita. So this is a proof against Rav Yitzchak, right? We're going back and forth. It would be a proof against Rav Yitzchak if I hold that this is mishum sakana. So then the Gemara says, but if you understand that the Braita is talking about a case of sakana, then it should also be true for a gadol, right? For an adult, that he should be allowed to have the milk of a non-kosher animal. But the Gemara answers gadol bayum dana, right? A gadol you have to evaluate before. In other words, it's not a stam heter. You need some kind of medical evaluation to determine if it's okay for him to eat or not. So the Gemara says, "Kata nami libayum dana." So if you have to do an evaluation for the adult, why did you have to do an evaluation for the kid? Why should I let the kid eat something that's not kosher without finding out if he really needs it or not? Amar Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yeshua stam tinok mesukan etzel chalai. Says no. Here, this is different because a stam infant we consider to be in a case of sakana if they don't have milk. So they don't need it. I mean, I don't need special medical evaluation. If they need milk, the understanding is they need milk. We can't wait around to find out if they need it right now or not. We assume that they need it, but that's not true of the adult. So what's the conclusion then? That in the case of the child, I do let him drink non-kosher milk. I let him drink non-kosher milk. I don't stop him. But when don't I stop him? If it's a case of sakana. But my conclusion is stam tinok misukan etzel chalav. In other words, I'm assuming that it's effectively it's always going to be okay, because the stam case is that I consider them to be the sakana. Abba Shaul Omer Noagin Hayinu Shionkini Behemata Rabbi Yom Tov. So this was the end of the Braita. Abba Shaul says that we were noheg, right? So in other words, it's effectively to drink the milk of a Behemata Torah, to take them to take the milk of a Behemata Torah on Yom Tov. So the Gemara asks, "Hey Chidami." So how does what's the case? Sakana feel b'Shabbat nami. In other words, milking the cow or milking the behemata hora on Shabbos is on Yom Tov is asur. But Abba Shul says we were noheg to do that on Yom Tov. Presumably, right when there was a need, we were noheg to do it. So the Gemara says. So before we said it's a case of sakana, right? That was how we understood the beginning of the Braita. Why do we let the child do this at all? Because there's a case of sakana, because a stam child always needs to have milk. So ika sakana fil b'Shabbat nami. So if we're talking about a case of sakana, what's the chidush of Abba Shul to say that we would let them do it on Yom Tov? Could do it also on Shabbos. Sakana, and if there and then if you say, well, okay, but that's not a case of sakana. If you'll be Yom Tov asur, then why should it be permitted on Yom Tov? It's asur. Lo tzricha di'ikat tzara v'kasapar mefarek klachar yadu Shabbat isur skila gazru banan Yom Tov isur lav lo gazru be'rabanan. This is a little bit technical. I'm going to just explain it briefly. The idea that you're not allowed to milk a cow or milk an animal on Shabbos is mishum mefarek. It's a malacha mefarek, that you're like taking something apart here. It's like you're taking apart something from the way it was grown. Suckling is in fact mefarek, but it's through a shinui, because we don't normally take milk from an animal by directly suckling from it. We normally take it by milking it and then drinking it. So that's the kalachar yad, right? That's the shinui, or the idea of kalachar yad is you're doing it al yedei shinui. So what's the Gemara saying? He says, so lo tzricha di'ikat tzara, that there's tsa'ar. Actually, hold on. I think the tsar here, just a second. So here we're talking about a case of tsa'ar, that there would be like great distress to the kid if he doesn't drink. because Savar Mefarek Lachar Yadhu, and Abba Shaul holds that suckling directly from the animal is a shinui. So Shabbat, the Isur Skila Gazru Rabbanan. So there's the fact that it's Kalachar Yad would mean that it's mutar, even on Shabbos. Because you're not doing it, it's not Mefarek Dioraita if you're doing it Kalachar Yad. So, but on Shabbos, because when you are Mefarek properly, you're Chayav Skila, Gazru Rabbanan. So the Rabbanan were gozer to not allow direct, even suckling, which is Kalachar Yad, they would gozer against suckling from a Behemah Tahora on Shabbos. Yom Tov, the Isur Lav, Yom Tov, it's not an Isur Skila, it's an Isur Lav, Lo Gazru Be Rabbanan. Okay, that answers Abba Shaul. It's a bit of a digression. We don't have to dwell on that. This is what we want to get up to. Tashema lo tochlum ki sheketzem. Right, so here in Parshat Shmini, the success Kohol, right, it's talking about things you're not allowed to eat. Kohol lechal gachon, anything that goes on its throat. The kohol lechal arba, anything that goes on 4. Ad kol marbe raglayim, up to things that have many legs. The chol hasher tzasharetz haaretz. Lo tochlu, you're not allowed to eat any of these shratzim. Ki sheketzem, because they're shekets, they're disgusting things. So the Braita says, Lo tochlum, you should not eat them, ki sheketzem. And the drasha is, Lo ta'achilum, you should not feed them. You should not feed these shkatzim, these shratzim, to others. So what would that be? Lahazhir hagdolim al haktanim. This is an azhara to adults to not feed treif things to their children. So now that I have this Braita, so the Braita says, I have a pasuk, lo tochlum, and the drasha is lo ta'achilum. So what does that tell me about adults in relationship to children when the child is going to be over on a mitzvah d'oraita?
You stop them.
Well, so at the very minimum, you don't actively help them to be over. That would be the minimum. But since it says Lazhir Hagdolim Al Haktanim, that's to warn the adults to not allow the child to be over, then I might even say maybe that means that even if the child by themselves is going to eat, that the adult should stop them, like you just said. So that's what the Gemara says. My love the amar lehu lo tochlu. Why don't we say that the Braita here is telling me that the adult has to say to the child, don't eat it. That he has to actively stop them from being over. So the Gemara says, lo, delo lisfule biyadayim. Delo lisfu lehu biyadayim, right? They shouldn't actively put it in their hands. That's the way I can understand the Braita. Anyway, let's just read a little bit more and then we'll stop for today. Tashma kol nefesh mikem lo tochal dam lahazhir gdolim al ktanim. I have a similar Braita where the isur of eating blood, it says kol nefesh, every soul among you. So what's the kol? You could just say nefesh mikem lo tochal dam. So what's kol nefesh? Lahazhir gdolim al ktanim. It's also to say that adults are warned against letting children eat blood. My love, lo tochlu. So again, I'll say why didn't I say that it means that they have to tell the child don't eat? Again, I'll say it's just that they can't feed it to them directly. Tashma emor v'amarta. So this is regarding Kohen becoming tameh, right? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe emor al Kohanim b'nei Aaron v'amarta hem l'nefesh lo yitama ba'amav. Right, so it's a funny kind of wording. Say to the Kohanim, and then say to them. So emor v'amarta. So what's the v'amarta? What does that add that I didn't know from emor? V'hazhir hagdolim al ktanim. It's to say that it's warning the adult about the child. My love to Amar Lahu Lo Titmu. So why didn't I say that means that the Kohen adult has to say to the Kohen child when they're about to touch something that's tameh or to go into a graveyard or something like that, to say to them, don't become tameh. Again, lo litmu lahu biyadayim. And no, again, I'm going to say it's so that they're not mitameh biyadayim. Meaning directly. It's just to tell them that the Kohen is not allowed to be mitameh the child. And then the Gemara goes on, we're not going to do the rest of the sugya, the rest of the Gemara is tzrichuta, right? It's going to say, why do I need all of these different cases? So I need them, right? I need each one of them for a particular reason. So at this point in the Gemara, what do we understand? That an adult is not allowed to themselves do an isur for a child, but they don't have to prevent a child from themselves doing an isur. That's what I get from all of this discussion. And we're gonna stop in a moment, but that just
and this only applies ben adam lemakom, not ben adam lehavara.
What do you mean?
So if the child's about to do an isur that is harmful to another person, then you stop them, or it doesn't say anything about
Oh, that's something else. That and there, yeah, because here we're talking about, right, we're talking about eating or doing some kind of an isur d'oraita, but yeah, about things that are ben adam lechavero, that's a whole different question, right? Because that gets into a whole different question about whether or not you're responsible for your child that does damage to somebody else. And stamadinyan is that you're not actually responsible. So but that's an interesting question. But yes, for the purposes of this discussion, we'll say and you're right to point it out. It's important to say that so far, all of the examples that we've brought have to do with mitzvot ben adam lemakom. That in cases of mitzvot ben adam lemakom, where there's an isur involved, that on the one hand, the adult is not allowed to do an isur for the child, or actively promote the child doing an isur d'oraita. But neither are they prohibited, neither are they enjoined to keep the child from doing an isur. So ultimately, this supports Rav Yitzchak, who said, let the kids go out, and, meaning that if they find the keys, matov, right? If they find the keys and you bring them on Shabbos, then that'll be great. But don't say anything to them, just take them walking. And if they find them, they find them. But they wouldn't be allowed to say to the kids, let's go see if we can find some keys today. So I'm going to leave. So that was a long discussion just to explain this one line in the run. But, I try to be thorough. And so I'm going to leave it off as a question in the run, and then we'll continue this next time. So let's just see. the Ran says that these are things that are asur d'oraita, that the nuyim are seem to be asur d'oraita, and that's how the Rambam holds. He says, but there's a problem with that. And what's the problem? Because we learn in a Braita later that children are permitted in all of these zinuyim except for nilata sandal, and then it's clear in the Gemara that they're permitted in all of that. When it says mutarim bekulan, it's talking about a case that it's permitted for an adult to wash them or to anoint them on Yom Kippur. And then, but obviously the stam case is going to be that it's just for the pleasure of the child, because stam child is not going to be in danger if they go for a day without a bath. If you withhold a bath from them for one day, they're not going to be in sakana. And if the inuyim are asur dioraita, heichi shari, how can it be permitted? V'haktiv lo tochlum, v'karibe lo ta'achilum, la'asir gdolim al haktanim. Now we understand that. How can it be that the Gemara allows for an adult to wash a child on Yom Kippur if it's dioraita, if isur v'chitza is an inui dioraita? How can it be that they themselves would wash them on Yom Kippur? We learn from this Gemara in Yevamot that you're not allowed to expressly do an isur for a child on Yom do an isur for a child. Stop. That's our question. So we'll continue next time. And that's it. Have a good night.
All right, good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Take it easy. Bye-bye.